So as we've been discussing, the Israeli ground offensive is proceeding apace. What we can tell is that they're, really working their way into Gaza City and sort of encircling that city. Obviously, first of all, a lot of journalists have been killed in Gaza who live there, so very hard to get reports out from the ground. They've had these communications blackouts. Foreign journalists are only allowed in with the express permission of the IDF.
And security review their footage.
Security review, but before anything gets posted, the Israeli military gets to take a look and decide what is allowed in and what is allowed out. However, there was a report that came out that seemed pretty solid from Channel 4 News, just to give you a sense of what it even looks like in Gaza now.
Inside the city.
Yeah, inside Gaza City. And it is pretty stunning to behold. Let's take a look at a little bit of that.
The war-ravaged outskirts of embattled Gaza City. An apocalyptic landscape now firmly under the control of Israeli soldiers. We're here with members of Infantry Division 828. The most intense fighting of this bloody conflict is beginning now in the heart of this city. Under the watch of Israeli soldiers, desperate Gazan civilians, whole families, some holding white flags, are fleeing their homes for the south. One man drags an elderly woman along in a chair. Soldiers call out in Hebrew in case some of the 240 Israeli hostages are being smuggled out too. Footage filmed on the Salahuddin Road by Palestinian journalists gives you a true sense of scale. There are young, there are old, clutching whatever's left of their lives. Across Gaza, 1.5 million people, 3/4 of the population, have been displaced from their homes. This is the hell they're running from. Fleeing south is no guarantee of safety. This, a hospital in Khan Yunis, where many have fled to.
So 3/4 of the population already displaced. And you can see there, the city is rubble. Like, so much of it has already been destroyed. Of course, these people think they're never going to be able to go home. For many of them, there is no more home there to go back to. It's rubble. It's destroyed. So, that's just a little glimpse of the horror that is unfolding for, more than 2 million people who are there on the ground.
Yeah, so he actually clarified also. He actually said, while we are clear, our report was not censored or subject even to editorial approval. We would never agree to that. Only the pictures from the military visits were subject to security review, e.g. to prevent maps or certain specific parts of a military vehicle. So Sikander Kermani, I thought he did a fantastic job of actually laying it out there. And yeah, look, we're getting to the point where it's becoming very clear that we are entering the next phase of the campaign. Because as you guys could see there, prior to this, it's just bombing and tanks. We're rolling, we're isolating, making sure we're cutting off, we're trying to get as many civilians out. Now, these guys were out on the ground. You saw how they're outside. They're all doing security. They're forming a perimeter around that rubble. They're trying to see if there's a stronghold in there. And there's a bunch of tunnels that are underneath. Now we're getting into the hand-to-hand combat. And now we need to start looking at the casualty numbers very closely, because this is when IDF casualties, if they ever were, are going to start spiking. Now, we're about to play you a video. We're going to play some of this. And let's be very clear. This was straight up released by Hamas. This is not an endorsement or any of that. Because we lack journalistic footage, this is the footage they are putting out of their fighters engaged in hand-to-hand combat or in small arms fire, RPGs and all these other things, trying to take out Israeli tanks, just to give people a sense of what the actual battle looks like. We just saw it from the Israeli side. We're playing it here. You could see here, you've got Israeli tanks that are in the middle of the city. This is all being zoomed in. ISIS used to edit and their stuff all like this. Part of the reason is that they try to cut only the most exciting parts, quote unquote,
where they're
looking, heroic looking, and they also edit it. It's funny just watching this, getting total flashbacks to ISIS. ISIS also used to cut it this way in order to entice younger guys to come and join them and try to make it look as much as Call of Duty as possible. And that's basically what they're doing here. But you can see they're zooming in, they're highlighting tanks, they're showing them, trying to take them out. Nobody knows whether how many have been taken out or not. You could see they're inflicting some damage, but like who knows, how much. These are pretty well armored and well supplied in terms of the Israeli military. The only point being that we're now at that turning point where we're going to start to see a lot more casualties, both on the Hamas side and on the Israeli side, where when you got to come in, you got to clear rubble. When you're rolling tanks down the street and you're coming into, you got 2P huge things of rubble here, and you got all these positions where somebody can take a shot at you, and then maybe you've got guys outside of the tank who are behind you and all that. This is World War II. We saw this type of combat, Stalingrad, Mosul, so many of these different places, and this is where I think things can start to get really gnarly, especially when you consider that you've got this massive 300-mile tunnel network, which is underneath that. So the Israelis still have not released a lot of the data, and I think one of the reasons they're keeping such a tight control is I think some of the battles that are happening on the ground there, which we're not able to see, are vicious, brutal stuff is happening there between these fighters and between the Israelis.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy for a modern military like Israel to go in and carpet bomb.
Yeah.
It's easy to roll in with tanks. And even when tanks are fired on, like they are so well armored that it's very difficult very difficult to take out one of these tanks, especially given the types of weapons that Hamas has access to. So, all of those things, you're unlikely to take significant casualties. It's when you actually have to get out and do this sort of like direct hand-to-hand combat that things really change. There was one piece that really caught my attention with regards to the hostages that Hamas is still holding here. Put this up on the screen from the New York Times. It shows you that there is a real tension between the Israeli ground offensive and the goal of bringing these hostages back safe and sound. So apparently, according to this reporting, Israel and Hamas actually almost had a deal to free roughly 50 hostages. This was focused on the civilian hostages. A number of the hostages are also Israeli military. Indirect talks mediated by Qatar snagged after Israel's ground invasion of Gaza on October 27th. They have resumed, but hopes for a quick release have faded. So effectively, they, according to this report, were very close to securing this deal for the release of 50 hostages. But when they started in earnest the ground offensive on October 7th, then it was like, all right, well, the deal's off. You have a statement here from Israel's defense minister in response to this report. Yoav Gallant says there will be no pause without the return of hostages and missing persons. The only way of saving the hostages is if Israel continues its ground operation. That's what they want to say to try to erase what is a very clear tension between the goal of getting these hostages back safe and sound and the goal of just like destruction of Gaza City. There's another piece here, though, Saagar, that really jumped down at me, which it's incredible to me that this isn't more of a subject of reporting, but somewhere buried like the 8th paragraph of this report, they say so far the negotiations have only focused on releasing civilian hostages, according to these officials, as I was just saying. The Israeli soldiers held in Gaza may eventually be part of a separate track of negotiations, possibly to be exchanged for hundreds of Palestinian women and minors who are held without charge in Israeli prisons. And it's astonishing to me that, first of all, I don't know how they're not called hostages when they're women and minors who are held without charge in Israeli prisons, and how this isn't a subject of more conversation, that this is going on the Israeli side. So they're saying potentially some future deal may trade the Israeli soldiers for these women and children who are being held by the hundreds without charges in Israeli prisons.
Yeah, we don't even know much about them. There's some speculation they might have been guest workers, people who were coming across. Of course, the Israelis are claiming that they were involved in October 7th, so who knows? But yes, you are right, and part of the reason why that they're separating off those IDF soldiers is that Israeli society, and I think even the rules of war and others, are very distinguishing between people who are straight up civilians,
innocent
and people
civilians
in uniform. I'm not justifying them taking hostage, but it's POW is a very different status. Internationally protected, Red Cross, all of that. I don't know if Hamas is abiding by all of those. By the way, I hope that they are. They probably are not. But even in terms of negotiation at the Israeli government, they're looking at it differently. Let's go to the next part here, just because this is also important, and I thought the Financial Times has been doing really good work here. We can put up their piece exactly about the military briefing in the battle for Gaza City, highlighting some of the things that I was talking about. Exactly as you can see in their map for those who are watching, you can see where the damaged areas are the most, and you can also see where the damaged areas are viewed so that there is a total circle around Gaza City. The problem for Gaza City and for where a lot of those tunnels are is that they have not actually inflicted all that much damage outside of the outskirts. So inside the city, where the majority not only of the population was, but also where the tunnel network, the main infrastructure and all of that, it appears it might have held off, Krystal, because there's hostages there. They might have held off for who knows, variety of reasons, but that's where a lot of the battle is about to be going into. And they quote some military experts here in the story, and they say the IDF is getting dragged into urban fighting in a packed, dense city. Below that, you have these tunnel systems that proffer every advantage to defense. They are going to encounter layers upon layers of complexity. It is very tough, and they have not even started. They point to the fact that this really is a reversion now to straight up guerrilla warfare, urban tactics, quote unquote, back to guerrilla 101. You've got hostages, you've got these 240 people. RPGs are one of the weapons that they're going to have to contend the most with. It's something that Hamas has an untold amount that they've been able to supply themselves and stockpile over the years. And really what they say is, this is the preview. Infantry will be required to leave their armored vehicles, maintain roadblocks, trying to protect themselves from Hamas. The Financial Times has reported last week dozens of buildings have already been destroyed by airstrikes. Hamas has been denied using some of their staging areas and all of that by the Israelis, at least so far. But enough of the infrastructure remains that it's going to be a hellish fight. They also point, Krystal, exactly to what you were talking about with those tanks and where they have some particular vulnerability to RPGs and where the Hamas fighters will be aiming towards. So if you want like a real, just straight up like military tactical briefing, I do recommend reading this. It does point out some of the IDF advantages. They've got drones, they've got air power, obviously, they have artillery, but a lot of that starts to go away whenever you get real close. You get close enough to your enemy that you can actually see them, and that's unfortunately where I think we're headed right now.
They have a little bit of the military strategy here that Israel plans to employ to try to limit their casualties. They say their aim will not be to fight street by street as U.S.-led forces did in Fallujah during the Second Iraq War. Instead, its plan is to clear out pockets of territory, use them as bases for urban raids. The results will be a series of small battles and skirmishes for different sections of the territory. They go on and say the aim for each raid is to gather fresh intelligence on Hamas and its military infrastructure. Israeli forces will then withdraw and call in airstrikes. Then those will lead to more raids in an iterative process. I also thought this was interesting, eyebrow-raising. The Israeli military has shifted the focus away from targeting the high-ranking Hamas planners behind October 7th to include mid-level field lieutenants leading the fight against Israeli troops. They say this would significantly undermine Hamas's capabilities to carry out counterattacks. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Anyway, I agree. We are going to continue to see some of this evolve, and I think some of the tactical analysis and all that going in is a preview of how some of the worst has still yet to come. Especially, the Israelis really need to start girding themselves for this death toll. It's going to start to go up. There's just no way around it if you're going to go ahead and fight this way.
Yeah, and to bring it back around to the hostage piece, like these hostages are, many of them likely held in Gaza City and very much at risk.
Yeah.
So there's also, much of the
fight
Israeli
with that consideration
population.
too.
Yeah, and I'm just talking about the polls that we've seen coming out of Israel. There's very little concern for Palestinian civilian life coming out of the Israeli public at this point. There is a lot of concern for the hostages and bringing them back safe and sound. So, if you have a lot of hostages who are also, quote unquote collateral damage in this fighting, and you already see that they sort of blew up a hostage deal that they had in hand to move forward with this ground offensive, that can also be very difficult politically for Netanyahu within his own populace.
Yes, that's right.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.